The November rain pelted against the glass windows of Apex Innovations headquarters in downtown Chicago, the droplets racing down the sleek surface like tears. The city skyline was barely visible through the early morning fog, a ghostly silhouette of steel and concrete against the gray dawn sky. Inside the pristine 47th floor executive suite, Elena Rodriguez wiped down the mahogany conference table with practiced precision, the lemon scent of cleaning solution filling the air. At 26, her hands were already beginning to show the early signs of her mother's, calloused and dry from years of cleaning chemicals. The engagement ring she once wore had been sold months ago to help cover her mother's initial medical bills, leaving only a pale band of skin as a reminder of what could have been. Elena glanced at her watch. 6:15 a.m. The board meeting wouldn't start until 9:00, but she needed this time to gather her thoughts before the cleaning crew supervisor arrived for inspection. The building was eerily quiet at this hour, with only the occasional security guard making rounds. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the first commuters arriving, tiny figures hurrying through the rain with umbrellas and briefcases, heading to jobs in the financial district. Elena's mother, Carmela, had been the head of cleaning services at Apex for nearly 20 years, starting when Elena was just 6 years old. Often, she would bring Elena with her during school breaks when childcare was too expensive. Elena grew up hiding in supply closets, doing homework in empty offices, and learning every inch of this building long before she understood what business was conducted inside it. Last week's stroke had left Carmela confined to a hospital bed, her normally animated face now partially frozen, her rapid-fire Spanish instructions reduced to labored whispers. "You go to work for me," Carmela had insisted from her hospital room, her good hand gripping Elena's with surprising strength. "We cannot lose this job. It pays for your school." Her mother's eyes, dark and intense, hadn't left room for argument. Elena had reluctantly agreed, postponing her MBA classes to cover for her mother temporarily. The hospital bills were mounting daily, and their insurance covered only a fraction of the costs. Without this income, they would lose everything, including Elena's chance at the education her mother had sacrificed so much to provide. As she moved methodically around the room, adjusting the ergonomic chairs evenly around the table, just as her mother had taught her, Elena's eyes drifted to the presentation materials left on CEO Jonathan Pierce's desk. He must have been working late last night and forgotten to lock them away. The heading caught her attention: Proposed Restructuring Plan, Confidential. Curiosity got the better of her professional boundaries as she skimmed the document, her heart sinking with each bullet point. The plan outlined the outsourcing of all maintenance and cleaning services, effectively eliminating her mother's job and those of 27 others, many of whom were immigrants supporting families. The document clinically detailed the 1.2 million annual savings and streamlined operations without a single mention of the human cost. Elena's hands trembled as she carefully placed the document back exactly as she had found it. She felt sick to her stomach. She was no stranger to corporate ruthlessness. Her economics degree and 2 years of business school had taught her how these decisions were made. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was studying to make exactly these kinds of calculations someday. But this was personal. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These were real people, like Mrs. Diaz, who was putting her son through college, or Mr. Patel, working 2 jobs to support his elderly parents. People who had spent more time in this building than most of the executives who occupied the corner offices. The buzz of her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was a text from her roommate, Zoe. "How's it going? Hanging in there?" Eleanor typed back a quick, "Yes, all good," before slipping her phone back into her uniform pocket. The truth was more complicated. She was exhausted from juggling hospital visits, her mother's job, and trying to keep up with her readings for the classes she was missing. Her scholarship covered tuition, but not living expenses, and her savings were dwindling rapidly. The cleaning job paid barely above minimum wage, despite her mother's supervisory position. That was another detail outlined in the restructuring document. How outsourcing would eliminate the unnecessarily hierarchical cleaning staff structure. The ping of the elevator down the hall signaled someone's arrival, much too early for the executives who rarely appeared before 8:30. Perhaps it was Mark, the security guard who sometimes brought her coffee when he made his rounds. Elena quickly resumed her cleaning duties, moving to the windows with glass cleaner in hand. She heard the sharp click of heels against marble flooring before the figure appeared at the doorway. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone would be in here," came a startled voice. Elena turned to find herself face-to-face with Natalie Chen, the newly appointed Chief Financial Officer, the youngest and only female C-suite executive at Apex. At 35, Natalie had made headlines when she was hired away from a competitor 6 months ago, breaking both age and gender barriers in the process. "Just finishing up, Mom," Elena replied politely, lowering her eyes as her mother had taught her. "Always be respectful, never intrusive, make yourself invisible. That was the unspoken rule for cleaning staff." "No need to rush on my account," Natalie said, setting down her leather briefcase. She looked tired, with slight shadows under her eyes that her expensive makeup couldn't quite conceal. "You're Carmela's daughter, aren't you? I heard about her stroke. How is she doing?" Elena's surprise must have shown on her face, because Natalie smiled gently. "Your mother has been cleaning my office for 5 years. We talk sometimes. She keeps a photo of you on her cart. Her daughter, the business student." That small moment of recognition, of seeing her mother as a person rather than a service, sparked something in Elena. Perhaps there was an ally here. "She's stable but frustrated at being stuck in the hospital," Elena answered, setting down her cleaning supplies. "The doctors say her speech should improve with therapy, but it will take time. I'm covering her shifts until she recovers." Natalie nodded, extracting files from her briefcase. "That's admirable. Are you in school?" "MBA at Northwestern. Night classes," Eleanor replied, surprised at how easily this conversation flowed across hierarchical lines that usually remained firmly drawn. "I had to postpone this semester, though." "Northwestern has an excellent program," Natalie commented, genuine interest in her voice. "What's your focus?" "Corporate ethics and sustainable business models," Elena said, a hint of irony in her tone as her eyes inadvertently flicked toward the restructuring document. Natalie followed her gaze, her expression shifting subtly. "You saw the proposal." It wasn't a question. Eleanor froze, caught between honesty and self-preservation. Her mother's job, all their jobs, hung in the balance. "I shouldn't have looked at private documents," she conceded. But yes. Natalie was quiet for a moment, assessing Elena with a new intensity. She walked to the windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline now emerging from the morning fog. The rain had intensified, drumming against the glass with increasing urgency. "Jonathan's been pushing this for months," she finally said, her voice low. "It's part of his aggressive cost-cutting strategy to impress the board before his contract renewal." She turned back to Eleanor. "What did you think of it?" The question seemed like a trap, but something in Natalie's eyes suggested genuine curiosity. Elena took a deep breath. "May I speak freely?" At Natalie's nod, words began pouring out, fueled by 2 years of business theory and a lifetime of watching her mother's struggle. The restructuring plan projects an annual savings of $2 million by outsourcing, but it doesn't account for the hidden costs. Lower quality service, security risks with rotating contractors, higher turnover rates, and the PR impact of laying off loyal employees during record profit years. Elena's voice grew stronger as she continued, outlining an alternative approach that would achieve similar efficiency gains through process improvements and modest technology investments while retaining the existing staff. The cleaning teams already know which executives need their offices spotless and which ones don't mind some creative chaos. They know which board members are allergic to certain cleaning products and which teams need extra attention after pulling all-nighters. That institutional knowledge has value that won't appear on a balance sheet. She explained how a hybrid model could work, where core staff were retained while specific periodic services were contracted out. is not just about the numbers on the spreadsheet, she concluded. It's about the company's long-term sustainability and the people who've given years of their lives to Apex. Natalie's expression was unreadable as she checked her watch. The board meets in 2 hours to vote on this proposal, she said quietly. Jonathan is flying in from New York, but his flight's been delayed by weather. They're expecting me to present in his place. She looked directly at Eleanor. How would you like to attend grad school on a full corporate scholarship? Elena blinked in confusion. Ma'am, I need your help, Natalie said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. What you've just outlined is exactly what I've been trying to argue for weeks, but Jonathan has the board wrapped around his finger. They need to hear this perspective from someone who understands both the business angles and the human impact. Elena's mind raced, trying to process what Natalie was suggesting. But I'm the cleaning lady's daughter. They wouldn't listen to me. They won't know that, Natalie replied, a determined glint in her eye. You'll be introduced as my new executive assistant, helping with the presentation. Once you start speaking, with the passion and insight you just showed me, they'll listen. Eleanor shook her head, backing away slightly. That's fraud. We could both lose our jobs. Not fraud, Natalie corrected. A strategic presentation of resources. I'm not asking you to claim credentials you don't have, just to present your analysis, which frankly is more thorough than what our strategy team produced. She paused, letting her words sink in. Look, I've been fighting this battle alone for months. The board sees me as the diversity hire, the token woman who should be grateful for her seat at the table. They tune me out, but a fresh voice, someone who can speak to both the financial and human elements, might break through. Elena remained hesitant, her practical nature warring with the opportunity being presented. Why would you risk your position for this, for people you barely know? Natalie's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing something more personal beneath. My father was a janitor at my first corporate job. He worked nights cleaning the same building where I was climbing the ladder. Most of my colleagues never knew. I was too ashamed to tell them. She looked away, composing herself. I've regretted that shame every day since he passed. This is my chance to make a different choice. Outside, thunder rumbled across the Chicago skyline as the storm intensified. It matched the tumult in Eleanor's mind as she weighed her options. If she refused, her mother and her friends would lose their jobs. If she agreed and failed, she could jeopardize her future career before it even began. But if she succeeded, I'll need to change, she finally said, gesturing to her gray cleaning uniform. A slow smile spread across Natalie's face. I keep spare clothes in my office for emergencies. You're about my size. We have 90 minutes to prepare you. Are you familiar with the board members? Elena nodded. I've researched them all for my corporate governance class. Howard Blackwell is the most influential. Old money, conservative outlook. Rebecca Winters heads the audit committee. She values precision and detests wastefulness. James Morrison is the newest member, tech background, progressive but inexperienced in this sector. Natalie's eyebrows rose in appreciation. You've done your homework. This might actually work. As they hurried toward Natalie's office, Elena sent a quick text to the cleaning supervisor, claiming illness and asking another worker to cover the remaining areas. The deception left a sour taste in her mouth, but she consoled herself with the greater purpose. This wasn't about her advancement. It was about protecting her mother's legacy and the livelihoods of people who had few other options. In Natalie's spacious corner office, with its panoramic view of Lake Michigan now obscured by sheets of rain, Elena found herself being transformed. As she changed into Natalie's spare clothes, a charcoal pencil skirt and cream silk blouse that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent, she felt like an actress preparing for the most important role of her life. Remember, Natalie coached as she lent Elena a pair of heels, you belong in that room as much as any of them. Your analysis is sound. Your perspective is valuable. Don't let them intimidate you. An hour later, Elena stood in the executive bathroom staring at her reflection. Gone was the grey cleaning uniform, replaced by the borrowed business attire that somehow made her stand taller. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, now fell in loose professional waves around her shoulders. The transformation was startling, not because she looked unrecognizable, but because she looked exactly like what she was studying to become. This wasn't a costume, it was a preview of her future self. "Remember, the key is confidence," Natalie coached, applying a final touch of subtle makeup to Elena's face. "You know this material. You've lived it from both sides." Elena nodded, but her stomach churned with anxiety. What they were doing wasn't technically dishonest. She wasn't claiming credentials she didn't have, but it still felt like a masquerade that could cost both women their positions if it went poorly. "What if they ask about my background?" she asked, smoothing down the unfamiliar fabric of the designer skirt. "I'll handle those questions," Natalie assured her. "Just focus on the proposal and the alternatives. That's your area of expertise." They rehearsed key points, with Natalie offering suggestions on delivery and anticipating potential objections. "Howard will try to interrupt you. Don't let him derail your flow. Rebecca responds to data, so lead with the numbers when addressing her concerns." The crash course in boardroom politics was dizzying, but Elena absorbed it all, drawing on years of observing executives from the shadows. She had watched countless presentations from her vantage point as the invisible person in the room. She knew how the successful ones commanded attention and how the failures lost their audience. Now she would put that knowledge to use. As they prepared to leave the bathroom, Elena caught Natalie's arm. "Why me? There must be junior analysts or business associates who could help you oppose this." Natalie's answer was simple. "Because you care about the outcome more than anyone else in this building. That passion can't be faked." The board members began arriving at 8:45, filtering into the conference room with coffee cups and leather portfolios. Elena recognized most of them from company photographs and news articles she'd studied in her corporate governance class. Howard Blackwell, 72 and imperious, with a shock of white hair and cold blue eyes that had intimidated executives for decades. Rebecca Winters, mid-50s, meticulously groomed, with a reputation for shredding unprepared presenters. James Morrison, 38, relatively new to the board, still eager to prove himself among the veterans. There were 7 others, each with their own power dynamics and alliances that Eleanor had mapped out in case studies. Now they were real people, exchanging pleasantries and barely noticing her presence as she stood beside Natalie, clutching a tablet containing their presentation. Natalie made the introduction smoothly, presenting Elena as Ms. Rodriguez, my new executive assistant who's been instrumental in developing our alternative restructuring approach. Eleanor felt the weight of their assessing gazes, some curious, others dismissive. Howard Blackwell barely acknowledged her presence, while Rebecca Winters offered a perfunctory smile that didn't reach her eyes. James Morrison gave her a more genuine nod, perhaps recognizing a fellow outsider in the room of established power players. By 9:15, with Jonathan's flight still delayed somewhere over Pennsylvania, according to the updates Natalie received, the meeting commenced without him. The storm had intensified outside, lightning occasionally illuminating the room, despite the bright overhead lights. Thunder punctuated the formal opening remarks by the board chairman. Natalie began with a brief overview of the current financial position, acknowledging the need for operational efficiencies, but suggesting that the proposed approach required reconsideration. Rather than presenting Jonathan's proposal in his absence, I believe it would be more productive to explore an alternative model that achieves similar savings with less organizational disruption. Ms. Rodriguez will walk you through our counter-proposal. The room fell silent. Elena's throat went dry as she rose from her seat, feeling like an imposter in every sense. The tablet in her hands suddenly felt heavy, and for a terrifying moment she wondered if she would be able to speak at all. Then she caught sight of a photograph on the wall, Apex's founding team from 1982, including a young custodian standing slightly apart from the executives, but still included in the frame. The company had different values once. Taking a deep breath, she began. The proposed outsourcing model presents significant hidden costs and risks that undermine its projected savings, she stated, her voice growing steadier with each word. She methodically dismantled the original proposal's assumptions, drawing on case studies from her MBA coursework and real-world examples she'd witnessed through her mother's experiences. When Howard interrupted with a dismissive comment about necessary tough decisions in business, Elena countered with precision. With respect, Mr. Blackwell, the research shows that companies treating employees as disposable assets typically underperform their competitors by 18% over a 5-year period. The data from PricewaterhouseCoopers and McKinsey supports this conclusion across multiple sectors. Howard's eyebrows shot up, clearly not expecting such a specific and confident rebuttal from someone he had assumed was a junior assistant. Elena presented her alternative approach, a hybrid model that maintained core staff while strategically outsourcing only specific functions, coupled with process improvements that would generate comparable savings within 18 months while preserving company culture and institutional knowledge. The existing cleaning staff already functions as informal security monitors, reporting suspicious activities and unauthorized access attempts. In the past year alone, they've identified 7 potential security breaches that might have gone unnoticed by our formal security team. This caught Rebecca Winter's attention, who leaned forward with increased interest. "Do you have documentation of these incidents?" she asked. Elena nodded, pulling up supporting data that Natalie had helped her compile during their preparation. "Yes, ma'am. The incidents are logged in the security office reports, though they're rarely highlighted in executive summaries." As she continued her presentation, Elena drew on her unique perspective, describing the inefficiencies she'd observed from the ground level: duplicative work, underutilized resources, and antiquated processes that could be streamlined without eliminating positions. The current cleaning staff spends approximately 22 hours per week waiting for executive meetings to conclude before they can access certain areas. By adjusting scheduling and implementing zone-based cleaning protocols, we can reduce this downtime by 80% without additional personnel costs. She outlined a technology solution, a simple app that would allow staff to report completed tasks and identify areas needing attention, eliminating the need for supervisory overhead while improving accountability. The development costs would be approximately $45,000, with an expected ROI within 4 months based on improved resource allocation. She noticed 2 board members exchanging impressed glances as she delved into the financial projections. James Morrison was taking detailed notes, occasionally nodding in agreement. Even Howard seemed less dismissive, though his expression remained skeptical. Elena felt a surge of confidence as she moved to the human impact section of her presentation. Beyond the numbers, there's a compelling case for maintaining our core cleaning staff based on loyalty and institutional knowledge. The average tenure among our cleaning team is 8.7 years, compared to the industry average of 1.3 years. This translates to fewer training costs, reduced errors, and stronger organizational commitment. She shared specific examples, without naming names, of how the cleaning staff had gone above and beyond during crises, from weather emergencies to last-minute client visits. These are individuals who consider themselves part of the Apex family, not interchangeable service providers. The rain lashed against the windows as Elena concluded her presentation, the storm providing a dramatic backdrop to her final points. "These aren't just hypothetical projections," she stated, displaying a final slide with implementation milestones. "This approach has been successful at companies like Meridian Global and Tech Forward, resulting in both cost efficiencies and improved employee retention. Their case studies show an average 15% reduction in operational costs while maintaining or improving service quality metrics." She met each board member's gaze as she finished. "The decision before you isn't simply financial, It's about what kind of company Apex wants to be, one that values loyalty and institutional knowledge, or one that prioritizes short-term gains at the expense of long-term sustainability. A heavy silence filled the room when she finished, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Howard Blackwell cleared his throat, adjusting his tie as he addressed Elena directly for the first time. "That was, unexpectedly thorough," he conceded reluctantly, "though I question some of your assumptions about the value of institutional knowledge among cleaning staff." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackwell, when you visited last spring with your grandson who has severe peanut allergies, do you recall how your office and the conference rooms you used were specially cleaned to remove all potential allergens?" Howard's expression changed slightly. "I do. That wasn't in any formal request," Elena continued. "Mrs. Diaz overheard your concern and took the initiative. That's the kind of institutional knowledge and care that doesn't translate to a contractor checklist." Howard sat back, considering her words with a new perspective. Rebecca Winters was more direct in her questioning. "Your projections show an 18-month timeline to achieve full savings, while the outsourcing model promises immediate results. In today's market, shareholders expect quick action. How do you justify the delayed gratification?" It was a fair question, and one Elena had anticipated. The outsourcing model's immediate savings are offset by transition costs that aren't fully accounted for in the proposal. When we factor in contract negotiation, security clearances for new personnel, training periods, and the inevitable productivity dips during transition, the actual first-year savings are closer to $700,000, not the projected $1.2 million. She pulled up a detailed breakdown of these costs. "Our model shows lower initial returns, but greater stability and cumulative savings over a 3-year period, which aligns better with our strategic goals than short-term stock bumps." James Morrison built on this point, addressing the room rather than Elena specifically. "There's growing investor interest in sustainable business practices and corporate social responsibility. The negative press from mass layoffs could impact our stock more than the cost savings would benefit it." He turned to Elena. "Have you modeled the potential PR impact?" She hadn't expected this question, but managed to respond thoughtfully. "We haven't quantified it precisely, but similar actions by competitors have resulted in an average 3 to 5% temporary stock dip following announcements of major outsourcing initiatives. More significantly, they've faced increased difficulty in recruiting top talent, particularly among younger demographics who prioritize corporate values in their employment decisions." The discussion continued for nearly 40 minutes, with board members raising questions and concerns that Elena addressed with increasing confidence. Natalie occasionally interjected to provide additional context or to redirect the conversation when it veered into areas beyond Elena's knowledge, but for the most part, she allowed Elena to lead. As the exchange progressed, Elena could sense the room's energy changing. What had seemed like a foregone conclusion was now being seriously reconsidered. Even Howard, initially the most resistant, was engaging with the alternative proposal on its merits rather than dismissing it outright. "Your approach requires more nuanced implementation," he noted, "but I can see the potential long-term advantages." As the discussion wound down, Rebecca Winters asked the question Elena had been dreading. "Where did you study, Ms. Rodriguez? Your analysis is impressive." Elena felt a moment of panic, her eyes darting briefly to Natalie. Before either could respond, the conference room door swung open. Jonathan Pierce rushed in, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled from his journey through the storm. "My apologies for the delay," he announced, shaking rain from his coat. "O'Hare was absolute chaos. I hope I haven't missed too much." There was an awkward pause as the board members exchanged glances. Finally, the chairman spoke. "Actually, Jonathan, we've had some compelling new analysis presented in your absence. Natalie and her assistant have outlined an alternative to the outsourcing proposal that merits serious consideration. Jonathan's confusion was evident as he took his seat, trying to catch up on what he'd missed. Alternative proposal? That wasn't on the agenda. It emerged organically from our discussion, Rebecca explained, gesturing toward Elena. Ms. Rodriguez presented a hybrid model that achieves comparable savings while maintaining core staff and institutional knowledge. The projections are quite compelling. Jonathan stared at Elena, clearly trying to place her. Ms. Rodriguez, I don't believe we've met. Elena met his questioning gaze steadily, no longer feeling like an imposter, but like someone who had earned her place at this table, if only for today. I recently joined Natalie's team, she replied, the half-truth sticking in her throat but necessary to maintain the fragile progress they'd made. Jonathan quickly scanned the presentation materials, his expression darkening. This undermines months of work by my strategy team. I'm not sure why we're entertaining last-minute alternatives from junior staff. The dismissive tone wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Howard Blackwell, surprisingly, came to Elena's defense. The analysis stands on its own merits, Jonathan. We've spent the last hour examining the assumptions and projections, and they hold water. At the very least, it deserves equal consideration alongside your proposal. Several other board members nodded in agreement. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he recognized the shift in the room. Of course, he conceded. I'm simply surprised by the unconventional approach to today's meeting. The meeting concluded with a directive to develop a more detailed implementation plan for both approaches, with a final decision to be made at the next board meeting in 2 weeks. As the board members filed out, several stopped to shake Elena's hand, including Rebecca Winters, who slipped her a business card. "Call my office," she murmured. "We should talk about your career path." James Morrison was equally impressed. "That took courage," he told her quietly. "This board isn't known for welcoming new voices." Only Jonathan remained coldly professional, his brief acknowledgement barely masking his irritation at having his proposal delayed. Once the room had emptied except for Natalie and Elena, the two women exchanged stunned looks before breaking into relieved laughter. "That was incredible," Natalie said, squeezing Elena's arm. "You were incredible. What happens now?" Elena asked, the reality of their deception beginning to sink in. "Now," Natalie said firmly, "we tell the truth, together." Over the weekend, Elena visited her mother in the hospital, carefully recounting what had happened without causing Carmela additional stress. "You did this for me?" her mother asked, her speech still slurred but improving. "For all of us," Elena corrected. "But I need to come clean, Mama. I can't build a career on deception." Carmela nodded slowly. "You have always been honest. Too honest sometimes." She squeezed her daughter's hand. "But brave too. Your father would be proud." The mention of her long-deceased father brought tears to Elena's eyes. He'd been a janitor too, before a workplace accident took his life when Elena was just 4. His memory had driven both Carmela's protective instincts and Elena's determination to create a different path. Monday morning arrived with clear skies, the storm having passed through Chicago, leaving everything washed clean. Elena had spent Sunday preparing for the worst, updating her resume, researching legal implications, and mentally preparing to restart her MBA studies next semester if today went badly. She wore her own clothes this time, modest but professional attire that represented who she truly was. Not the cleaning uniform and not Natalie's borrowed finery, but the middle ground she had worked so hard to reach. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt different now that she was arriving through the main entrance rather than the service elevator, with her visitor badge prominently displayed. Natalie was waiting outside Jonathan's office, her expression a mixture of determination and apprehension. "Ready?" she asked as Eleanor approached. "As I'll ever be," Eleanor replied. They had agreed on this approach: full disclosure, joint responsibility, and a focus on the merits of the proposal rather than the circumstances of its presentation. Jonathan's assistant ushered them in with a curious glance. The CEO sat behind his imposing desk, his expression unreadable as they took their seats. Ms. Chen has requested this meeting to discuss what she calls an important disclosure regarding Friday's presentation, he began, his tone carefully neutral. I'm listening. Natalie spoke first, accepting full responsibility for the unorthodox approach while emphasizing the quality of Elena's contribution. I made a judgment call to present an alternative view that I believed the board needed to hear. The deception regarding Ms. Rodriguez's role was my idea entirely. She outlined how she had encountered Elena that morning, recognized her insights, and made the impulsive decision to include her in the presentation. It was professionally inappropriate, and I accept whatever consequences you deem appropriate, but I stand by the substance of what was presented. Elena then took her turn, explaining her actual position as temporary cleaning staff and her educational background. I accessed confidential materials that I shouldn't have seen, she admitted. That was wrong, regardless of my intentions. But having seen the impact the proposed outsourcing would have, I felt compelled to offer an alternative perspective. To their surprise, after an initially stern response, Jonathan's expression softened. He studied them both for a long moment before speaking. My mother was a housekeeper for 30 years, he revealed unexpectedly. She cleaned homes to put me through college. I rarely mention it because it doesn't fit the executive origin story people expect. He leaned forward, folding his hands on his desk. The board called me over the weekend. They were impressed, not just with the proposal, but with the fresh thinking. Apparently, I've been surrounding myself with too many yes men. He studied Elena thoughtfully. Ms. Rodriguez, what you did was inappropriate. Accessing confidential documents, participating under false pretenses, but your analysis was sound, better than sound. It highlighted blind spots in our approach that my team missed entirely. He turned to Natalie. And you, Ms. Chen. Your methods were questionable, but your instincts about what the board needed to hear were correct. He leaned back in his chair. We need more diverse perspectives in this company, clearly, even if they arrive through unconventional channels. The outcome was better than Elena could have hoped for. Formal disciplinary action for Natalie, a letter in her file, but no demotion or termination. A special committee to implement the alternative restructuring plan, co-led by Natalie and Jonathan's strategy director. No immediate action against the cleaning staff while the new approach was developed. And for Elena, a legitimate position as a junior business analyst while she completed her MBA with tuition assistance included. This isn't charity, Jonathan clarified as the meeting concluded. And it's not forgiveness for the deception. It's a recognition of talent and perspective that we clearly need. He fixed Elena with a penetrating look. Don't make me regret this decision, Ms. Rodriguez. I won't, sir, she promised, meaning it with every fiber of her being. As they left Pierce's office, Natalie grinned at her. That went better than we had any right to expect. Elena nodded, still processing the whirlwind of events. I can't believe he's giving me a chance. He's giving himself a chance, Natalie corrected. Smart leaders recognize talent, even when it arrives in unexpected packages. Elena immediately called her mother from the lobby, switching to rapid Spanish as she shared the news. Mama, she said, her voice thick with emotion, I have a story to tell you about how your daughter ended up in the boardroom instead of cleaning it, and what happened next. As she spoke, Eleanor watched the stream of employees entering the building, each with their own stories and struggles. The security guard, who had often brought her coffee, nodded in recognition as she stood there in her business clothes, a symbolic crossing of the invisible line that had separated their worlds. And Mama, she continued, when you're better, there will still be a place for you here. I made sure of that. 3 months later, Elena stood at the back of the conference room, watching as her mother, now recovered enough to return part-time, presented the new cleaning staff efficiency program to the operations team. Carmela's speech was still slightly affected, but her authority and expertise were unmistakable as she explained the zone system and digital tracking approach that had been implemented based on Elena's proposal. From her new office down the hall, small but with a window, Elena could see both where she had come from and where she was going. The journey between worlds had been unconventional and risky, but as she watched her mother fielding questions with the confidence of someone who knew her value, Elena knew they had both found their rightful places, not by hiding who they were, but by bringing their full selves to the table.